The digital clock on my sound recorder blinked 3:17 a.m. Another fruitless night. Another creaky old asylum with nothing but the wind and the exaggerated claims of amateur ghost hunters for company. My headphones amplified the silence, a vast, echoing void punctuated only by the hiss of my equipment and the distant rumble of a passing truck on the highway, miles away. Liam, the channel's charismatic but ultimately clueless frontman, was currently attempting to provoke a response from the resident spirits by reciting Shakespeare badly. I stifled a groan. This was getting old. Fast. My job, in theory, was to capture any anomalous sounds, whispers, knocks, EVPs, that would add some authenticity to the channel's theatrics. In reality, I mostly recorded silence and then spent hours in post-production cleaning up Liam's heavy breathing and the occasional cough from Brenda, the self-proclaimed psychic whose visions always seemed conveniently vague. I craved something real, something beyond the jump scares and manufactured drama. I wanted to hear something that would actually send a shiver down my spine. The GPS signal flickered on my phone as I scrolled through news articles. It displayed an anomaly, a dead zone about a mile off our current location. A residential area, according to the map. A shiver ran down my spine, but not a fear. This was the sort of thing that had made me study sound engineering in the first place. Electromagnetic disturbances. I shut off the screen. No. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself it was probably just a glitch. But the image of the dead zone lingered in my mind, a small circle of nothing in a sea of connectivity. It buzzed in my brain with a strange, insistent energy. Another sigh escaped me. It was probably nothing. Liam's performance would conclude shortly, then it would be off to the next haunted location. And more silence. I shifted in my seat, the metal folding chair groaning in protest. The asylum was a cliché, really. All peeling paint and staged cobwebs. Nothing but the expected. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And this was the one thing I never shared. The unshakable feeling of being observed in these spaces. The feeling I was searching for something deeper. I had to find something real out here. I closed my eyes and leaned back, the hiss of my headphones now a dull roar. And then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched ringing. Almost imperceptible, like the tinnitus I sometimes got after a loud concert. But this was different. It wasn't inside my head. It was outside, woven into the fabric of the silence. I opened my eyes, scanning the room. Liam was still droning on, oblivious. Brenda was nodding sagely, probably imagining she was communing with a long-dead patient. The ringing persisted, a constant, irritating whine that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. It was getting louder, insistent, and as I moved, it changed. I reached for my recorder, my fingers fumbling with the buttons. This was it. This was something. The ringing had become almost unbearable by the time Liam finally wrapped up his dramatic monologue. I mumbled something about needing to check the equipment outside and stumbled out into the cool night air. The ringing intensified as I moved away from the asylum, drawing me towards the residential area I had seen on my phone earlier. The GPS signal on my phone was still dead in that area, but now it was pulling at me, demanding I visit. Like a whisper in my ear, it called me to investigate. I was being drawn. The road was dark and deserted, the only illumination coming from the moon and the distant glow of streetlights. Each breath I took was growing more shaky, more panicked. I picked up my pace, the ringing growing louder with each step. Soon I arrived in front of a house. Normal. Too normal. A single-story ranch house, neatly manicured lawn, a swing set swaying gently in the breeze. It could have been any house, anywhere. But the ringing was deafening here, emanating from the house itself. It was a beacon, a siren's call in the dark. I reached out and touched the front gate. Cold. Metallic. A tingle shot up my arm. I glanced back at the asylum. Far away, no doubt, but it did nothing to calm my nerves. This ringing would kill me if I stayed out here. I knew it. Without hesitation, I pushed open the gate and stepped onto the property. The ringing became a roar, filling my head, my body, my very soul. It was an overwhelming wave of pure sound. I stumbled towards the front door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. As I placed my hand on the knob, the world went silent, only to then explode with more of the ringing. It was growing, morphing, solidifying into a real being. I turned the knob. The door was unlocked. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The interior was just as unremarkable as the exterior. A living room with a faded floral couch, a TV stand with nothing on it, a dusty coffee table. Everything was still and quiet, save for the ever-present ringing. It pulsed from every corner of the room, a tangible presence that pressed against my skin. The ringing shifted slightly, evolving into a complex drone of overlapping tones. It felt like music. Alien, horrifying music. I pulled out my recorder, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely hold it. I had to record this. I had to capture the sound. But as I pressed the record button, the ringing intensified again, morphing into something else entirely. A voice. Faint, whispery, but undeniably a voice. It spoke a language I didn't understand, yet somehow, I knew what it meant. It was calling me. It was welcoming me. I stepped further into the house, drawn by the insidious melody. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I saw a hallway stretched before me, disappearing into the darkness. The voice beckoned, and I started walking toward the hallway. The ringing warped again, now feeling as though the hallway was alive and speaking. I couldn't help but to continue forward. It was like walking into the void. The hallway stretched on forever. I couldn't tell how much time had passed, but as I passed the end of the hallway, I was in another hallway. One that was the same, but shifted ever so slightly, as if it was mocking me. The second hallway mirrored the first with unsettling precision. The same peeling wallpaper, the same warped floorboards that groaned under my weight, the same suffocating feeling of being watched. Except the wallpaper was now a shade darker, the floorboards creaked with a sharper, more insistent tone, and the feeling of being watched had intensified into a palpable dread. It was as if the house was calibrating its torment, fine-tuning the instruments of my fear. The insidious melody, the welcoming voice, pulsed stronger now, resonating within my very bones. It was no longer just a sound. It was a physical force, tugging me deeper into the labyrinthine depths of this place. My recorder was still running, the little red light a beacon in the encroaching darkness. I desperately hoped it was capturing something, anything, to justify this descent into madness. Each step was an act of defiance against my screaming instincts, each breath a shallow gasp against the thickening air. The silence between the creaks was the worst. An oppressive, anticipatory silence that felt heavier than lead. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the house's unnerving symphony. I tried to focus, to reason. This was impossible. Hallways didn't just repeat and shift. Voices didn't emanate from empty spaces. But here I was, a terrified explorer in a nightmare made real. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to ground myself in reality, to remember why I was here. The paranormal investigation, the desperate need to prove something, anything. It felt like a lifetime ago. When I opened my eyes, the hallway hadn't changed, but the quality of the darkness had. It was thicker, more viscous, clinging to the edges of my vision. And the whispering. It was closer now, more distinct, no longer a welcoming murmur but a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, all in that same indecipherable language. I could feel the vibrations in my teeth, the resonance in my skull. The voices seemed to burrow into my mind, probing, searching. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to run, to scream, to claw my way back to the door, back to the world outside. But my legs felt like lead, my throat constricted. I was trapped, both physically and mentally, caught in the house's horrifying embrace. I stumbled forward, blindly following the pull of the voices, the siren song of the impossible. A sliver of light appeared at the end of the hallway, a beacon in the oppressive dark. Hope flickered within me, fragile and desperate. Maybe it was an exit. Maybe it was a way out. I quickened my pace, the floorboards groaning in protest, the voices intensifying, a cacophony of whispers urging me on. As I reached the end of the hallway, I saw it wasn't an exit. It was a doorway. A doorway leading to another room. The room was circular, unlike any space I'd seen in the house so far. Stone walls replaced the peeling wallpaper, and the air was heavy with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic and sharp. A single flickering candle sat in the center of the room, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. The voices were deafening now, swirling around me, filling every corner of my mind. I clutched my head, trying to block them out, but it was no use. They were inside me, a part of me, driving me forward. In the center of the room, illuminated by the flickering candlelight, was a symbol etched into the stone floor. It was a complex design, a swirling vortex of lines and angles that seemed to writhe and pulse with an energy of its own. I knew, instinctively, that it was the source of the voices, the heart of the house's power. As I stared at the symbol, the voices coalesced into a single, clear voice, speaking directly into my mind. This time, I understood the language. It was ancient, archaic, but somehow, I understood. "Welcome home," it said. I froze, every muscle in my body rigid with terror. The voice echoed within me, resonating with a chilling familiarity. Home? This couldn't be my home. I didn't recognize anything. I began to feel ill, like my body wanted me to physically expel something. Bow rose in my throat. I reached a shaking hand out towards the symbol, drawn to it against my will. As my fingers brushed against the cold stone, a jolt of energy surged through me, a blinding flash of light that filled my vision. Then darkness. I awoke to silence. Not the oppressive silence of the hallways, but a deep, profound silence that felt almost peaceful. The voices were gone. The ringing was gone. The weight of the house's presence had lifted. I was lying on the stone floor, the symbol still visible beneath me. But something had changed. The room felt different. Lighter somehow. I sat up, my head throbbing, my body aching. I looked down at my hands and I gasped. They were different. Older. The skin was thinner, the veins more prominent. I stood up, my legs wobbly, and stumbled towards the wall. I reached out and touched the cold stone, and a memory flashed through my mind. A memory of this room, of this symbol, of a life I didn't recognize. A life lived within these walls. The truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't a visitor. I wasn't an investigator. I was a resident. This was my home. And I had been gone for a very, very long time. How long had I been gone? What had happened to me? I was so confused. Suddenly, a sound, very faint, broke the silence. A tiny creak behind me. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. Standing in the doorway, bathed in shadow, was a figure. Tall and gaunt, with eyes that burned like coals in the darkness. It raised a hand, beckoning me forward. And as it did, I recognized the face. It was me, but older, wiser, and infinitely more terrifying. "It's time," it rasped, its voice a dry, brittle whisper. "Time to come home." He gestured towards the hallway, a dark, gaping maw promising secrets and terrors beyond imagining. Was he the thing talking in my head? The source of all this madness? I couldn't bring myself to speak. I backed away from him, and as I did, I saw something flicker behind him, down the hallway. A shape moving in the shadows. A shape that looked eerily familiar. It looked like me again. "Time to come home." The words echoed in the cavernous space, a chilling invitation I desperately wanted to refuse. Two of me? One old, gaunt, and terrifying, and the other a fleeting shadow in the abyss of the hallway? My mind struggled to reconcile the impossible. Was this some elaborate trick? A hallucination born of madness and isolation? Or was it something far more sinister? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence that followed the older me's pronouncement. My breath hitched in my throat, refusing to come easy. The gaunt figure remained motionless, an obsidian statue guarding a gateway to nightmare. His eyes, burning like distant stars, held me captive. I wanted to scream, to run, to claw my way back to the sanity I'd so recently possessed. But my legs were rooted to the spot, frozen by a terror so profound it transcended understanding. My own older face, weathered and scarred, held an unnerving knowingness. I saw hints of pain, of regret, but also a chilling acceptance. It was the face of someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and had been irrevocably changed by the experience. A faint dripping sound echoed from somewhere deep within the hallway, each drop a tiny hammer blow against my already frayed nerves. Behind him, the shadow self shifted again, a distorted silhouette against the gloom. It mimicked my movements, a grotesque parody of my own unease. It was as if my fear had taken physical form, a living embodiment of the dread that consumed me. A low, guttural growl emanated from the hallway, a sound that vibrated in my chest and resonated with the deepest, most primal part of my brain. What was down there? What horrors awaited me in the darkness? I noticed that the air grew heavy, the temperature dropping sharply as if I were in a refrigerator. The smell of mildew permeated, and the scent of damp earth was strong and nauseating. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to turn and run back the way I came, to escape this nightmare before it swallowed me whole. But where would I go? There was no escape. I was trapped. Trapped in this ancient prison, trapped by my own fractured identity, trapped by the terrifying reflection of my future self. I looked back to the symbol on the wall. I had a flash of insight. The symbol seemed to vibrate, thrumming with power. I thought back to my arrival and how that symbol was involved. Was this a trap? And if so, who laid the trap? And more importantly, why? I needed answers, and I had a strong feeling that the answers lay in that hallway. With mounting dread, I started to walk, taking small steps toward the older version of myself. As I approached him, his gaze intensified, burning through me. The hallway behind him seemed to deepen, the shadows swirling like a vortex. A whisper of wind brushed past my ear, carrying with it the faintest hint of voices, whispering my name. Or were they? I couldn't be sure. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. With my advance, the gaunt man slowly took a step back into the hallway. The darkness seemed to envelop him, and the shadows grew stronger. With one last step, he disappeared completely. I was left standing at the edge of the abyss, staring into the heart of darkness, with only my shadow self for company. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, paralyzed by fear and indecision. My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out, a solution to this impossible situation. But there was nothing. Only the darkness, the whispers, and the terrifying certainty that I was on the precipice of something truly horrific. I glanced down at my hands again. The skin was definitely thinner, the veins more prominent. Each passing second I felt as if I was aging at an alarming rate. If I didn't make a decision soon, the decision might make itself for me. Gripping my hands into fists, I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. The darkness slammed into me like a physical force, instantly obliterating all sense of direction. I could feel the rough stone walls on either side of me, cold and damp against my skin. The air grew heavier, thicker, making it difficult to breathe. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a swarm of insects, their voices a cacophony of murmurs and groans. My shadow self mirrored my every movement, a silent, mocking companion in this descent into madness. My pulse hammered in my ears, each thud a deafening roar in the suffocating silence. I moved forward slowly, cautiously, my hands outstretched, feeling my way through the oppressive darkness. The floor beneath my feet was uneven, littered with debris. I stumbled several times, catching myself just before I fell. Each step I took seemed to deepen the sense of dread, the feeling that I was venturing into a place that was never meant to be disturbed. The temperature continued to plummet, and I shivered uncontrollably, despite the layers of clothing I was wearing. A faint, metallic scent hung in the air, the smell of blood and decay. Somewhere ahead of me, I heard a scraping sound, the unmistakable sound of something dragging across stone. It stopped abruptly, leaving only the whispers and the pounding of my heart. My senses were on high alert, straining to detect any sign of danger. My chest was tight, and my breathing ragged. I tried to remember how long I had been in the hallway, but time seemed to have lost all meaning. A sudden, sharp pain shot through my head, a blinding agony that threatened to overwhelm me. Images flashed through my mind, fragmented and distorted. Visions of ritualistic ceremonies, of chanting voices, of sacrifices made in the name of some ancient, unknowable god. I gasped, clutching my head, desperately trying to block out the images, to regain control of my thoughts. The pain subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving me weak and disoriented. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. Then I heard it again. The scraping sound. Closer this time. And then, a faint, guttural chuckle, right behind me. I whirled around, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway behind me was empty, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. My breath hitched in my throat. Had I imagined it? The chuckle, the scraping, it had sounded so real, so close. But there was nothing there now, only the suffocating silence that seemed to amplify the frantic beat of my own heart. Maybe the pain, the visions, had played tricks on my mind. But the metallic scent, the chilling air, those were undeniably real. I forced myself to take a shaky breath, trying to regain some semblance of composure. Panic wouldn't help me here. I had to stay focused, to understand what was happening, to find a way out. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, slowly inching forward, my eyes scanning the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. The scraping sound started again, a slow, deliberate drag that sent shivers down my spine. It was coming from further down the hallway, drawing me deeper into the unknown. My legs felt like lead, heavy and unresponsive, but I couldn't stop. I had to know what was making that sound. Curiosity, or perhaps a morbid fascination, warred with my fear, pushing me forward. With each step, the scraping became louder, clearer, punctuated by the occasional, almost inaudible whisper. The whispers were too faint to understand, just sibilant murmurs that seemed to slither into my mind, planting seeds of unease and dread. I strained to hear what they were saying, but they remained just beyond the edge of comprehension, taunting me with their secrets. My vision tunneled, focusing solely on the direction of the noise. My hands were clammy, and my mouth was dry. I felt a growing pressure in my chest, a sense of impending doom that threatened to crush me. The metallic smell intensified, becoming almost unbearable, the coppery tang of blood thick in the air. I swallowed hard, trying to fight back the nausea that was rising in my throat. As I rounded a bend in the hallway, I saw it. A faint, flickering light emanating from a doorway at the end of the corridor. It cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, painting grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in the periphery of my vision. The scraping sound was coming from inside the room. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the flashlight in my pocket. Should I turn it on? Reveal my presence? Or should I try to remain unseen, to observe what was happening without being detected? The thought of confronting whatever was inside that room filled me with dread, but the uncertainty, the not knowing, was almost worse. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a low, droning chant that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Taking another deep, shaky breath, I flicked on the flashlight, the sudden beam of light cutting through the darkness like a knife. The beam illuminated a chamber of horrors. The room was circular, its walls covered in intricate carvings that depicted scenes of ritualistic sacrifice and demonic worship. In the center of the room, a figure stood hunched over a stone altar, their back to me. They were clad in a tattered, blood-soaked robe, their head bowed in what appeared to be prayer. The altar was stained crimson, covered in what I could only assume was blood. Beside the altar lay a collection of strange tools, knives, and instruments that looked disturbingly like surgical implements. The scraping sound was coming from the figure, who was using one of the knives to carve symbols into the stone. My flashlight beam danced nervously over the scene, illuminating every grotesque detail. The air was thick with the smell of blood, incense, and something else, something acrid and sickeningly sweet. The chanting grew louder, more intense, filling the room with a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at my sanity. The figure began to sway back and forth, their movements becoming more erratic, more frenzied. A glint of metal caught my eye. On the altar, next to the blood-stained tools, lay a human skull, its eye sockets hollow and empty. My stomach churned. This wasn't just some abandoned place. This was a site of active ritual, a place of unimaginable evil. I wanted to run, to turn and flee as fast as my legs could carry me, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear and fascination. My feet were rooted to the spot, my gaze fixed on the figure at the altar. They raised their heads slowly, deliberately, and turned to face me. The shadows shifted, obscuring their face, but I could feel their eyes on me, burning into me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. A low growl emanated from their throat, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out their features, but I could sense the malevolence radiating from them. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the voices rising in a crescendo of madness. The figure raised the knife above their head, the blade glinting in the flickering light. And then they spoke. Their voice was raspy and guttural, a voice that seemed to come from the depths of hell. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, the words echoing in the chamber. "This place is not for you." They lunged forward. The world seemed to slow down. I saw the knife arcing through the air, aimed directly at my chest. I screamed, a primal sound of terror, and finally managed to break free from my paralysis. I stumbled backward, desperately trying to avoid the blow, but it was too late. The cold steel kissed my skin. Not the chest, thank God, but my left arm. A searing pain exploded from the point of contact, blooming outwards like a poisonous flower. The world swam, the chanting voices blurring into a single, deafening roar. I cried out again, more from shock than pain, though God knows there was plenty of that. The robed figure, now just a dark blur in my vision, pulled the knife back, ready for another strike. My mind, reeling just moments before, snapped into a brutal kind of focus. This was it. Fight or die. Adrenaline surged through me, numbing the pain and sharpening my senses. I ducked under the next swing, the blade whistling past my ear, close enough that I felt the wind disturb my hair. This close, I could smell them, a cloying mix of incense, stale sweat, and something else, something acrid and metallic that made my stomach churn. I lashed out with my good arm, catching them off guard. My fist connected with something solid, probably their jaw, and I heard a grunt of pain. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The figure stumbled back, momentarily disoriented. I seized the opportunity and scrambled away, back towards the entrance. My arm throbbed, and blood was already soaking my sleeve, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out of here. The chanting intensified, a frenzied, desperate plea that seemed to claw at my sanity. Behind me, I heard the figure regain their footing. Their breathing was ragged, but their pace was relentless. I reached the entrance to the chamber, and fumbled with the latch on the heavy wooden door. My fingers, slick with sweat and blood, slipped on the cold metal. The chanting was getting closer, the figure's heavy footsteps pounding behind me. Finally, with a desperate grunt, I managed to throw the latch. I yanked the door open and plunged into the darkness of the tunnel. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, blindly, desperately, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, a claustrophobic nightmare of damp stone and suffocating shadows. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind me, growing fainter but never disappearing completely. Every creak, every rustle, every imagined whisper sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I stumbled, fell, and picked myself up again, driven by pure, unadulterated fear. The image of the altar, the skull, the blood-stained tools, and the robed figure haunted my every step. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. I had to escape this place of evil. I pressed on, deeper and deeper into the darkness, praying that I would find a way out before it found me. I tasted blood on my tongue, not sure if it was mine or just the phantom memory of the altar. The air grew colder, and a new sound joined the symphony of horror, the dripping of water, each drop an agonizing reminder of the precious blood I was losing. What if I passed out from blood loss before I found my way out? The tunnel narrowed, forcing me to hunch over. My head pounded against the low ceiling. I had to keep going. I had to. The silence in between the drip drops became deafening. It was like the tunnel itself was holding its breath, waiting. The tunnel began to slope upwards, and I felt a sliver of hope ignite within me. Maybe, just maybe, I was getting closer to the surface. The air, though still cold and damp, felt slightly fresher. I kept running, my legs screaming in protest, my arms throbbing with pain. And then I saw it. A faint glimmer of light, far ahead in the darkness. It was barely perceptible, but it was enough. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me, pushing me forward with renewed vigor. I ran towards the light, ignoring the pain, ignoring the fear, focusing only on that tiny beacon of hope. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, and I could make out the shape of an opening ahead. I stumbled out of the tunnel, blinking in the sudden brightness. I was on the side of the mountain, high above the valley, far from the village and the accursed church. The air was clean and crisp, and the sun warmed my face. I had made it. I was alive. But the relief was short-lived. As I looked back at the entrance to the tunnel, I saw a dark figure silhouetted against the opening. The robed figure. They were still there. Still watching. Waiting. A chilling whisper, carried on the wind, reached my ears. "You can't escape us." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, scrambling down the treacherous slope, heedless of the danger. I had to get away. I had to get as far away from that place as possible. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. They were in my head now, a chorus of voices, chanting my name, promising me pain, promising me death. The world began to spin, the mountain blurring around me. I was losing consciousness, the darkness closing in. I had to keep going. I had to fight. But it was no use. The whispers were too strong. The darkness was too deep. I stumbled, fell, and tumbled down the mountainside, my body a rag doll tossed by the wind. The last thing I heard before the darkness consumed me was the chilling laughter of the robed figure, echoing through the valley. Then, only silence. A deep, unsettling silence. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally woke, the sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the mountain. My body was a mess of bruises and cuts. My arm throbbed with agonizing pain. But I was alive. I managed to drag myself to my feet and stumbled down the mountain, towards the village. But something was different. The air felt heavy, oppressive. The shadows seemed to move on their own. And the whispers were still there, inside my head. They hadn't gone away. They were a part of me now. A constant reminder of what I had seen, of what I had done. As I reached the outskirts of the village, I saw people staring at me. But their eyes were empty, vacant. And they were all wearing robes. The chanting began again, softly at first, then growing louder, more insistent. And then I realized, with a horrifying certainty, that I hadn't escaped at all. They had been waiting for me. They had known I would come back. Because now, I was one of them. The whispers grew louder, drowning out all other thoughts. The darkness closed in, and I welcomed it. Finally, I was home. They handed me a robe. Thank you for joining us on Oral Stories. The echoes of this tale will linger long after the credits roll. Remember, some fears are best left undisturbed. Until next time, stay safe, if you can.